everyone, welcome back. My name's Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and today I am wrapping up my August and September in reading. So I had initially filmed an entirely separate August wrap up, and you know, it was fine. I was gonna edit it, I was gonna post it, life happened, and when I finally got around to going to edit it, I couldn't find the footage. So I decided, since, well, I'm about to have a cat bomb the filming again. Ow. Anyway, I decided that since I couldn't find the footage and my September in reading had been absolutely abysmal, I was just going to combine the two and do one long video instead of doing a long video and a short video. So yeah, all in all, I'm going to be covering 13 books for this wrap up, 11 of which I read in August, which was my best reading month to date, and 2 of which I read in September, which was my worst reading month to date. So I definitely had a bit of a rebound reaction to that. But overall, it was a decent couple, like in terms of the quality of the books I was reading, pretty decent. And I'm excited to talk about some new favorites as well as some ones that didn't quite meet my expectations. So in August, I also participated in 2 different Readathons. The first was the Magical Readathon hosted by G over at the Book Roast. And that one was the autumn one. I'll link the announcement video down below, but I was completing the requirements to get the Master of Elements profession. So in all, I had to read 8 books for that. And then I was also participating in the new Releaseathon. This was co-hosted by my friend Rhea over at the Bookfinch, along with Kristen, Angela at Literature Science Alliance, and Shannon at That's So Poe. I'll put some links down below as well for those. And that was just kind of a bingo card, way to prioritize reading books that had been released this past year that you might not have gotten around to. So I'll indicate which books I read for which prompts for both of them, because there was a lot of overlap in my reading. The first book that I read in August was Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This was for the prompt host rec for the new Releaseathon, as well as the O, which is the bottom of the 3 levels for the Magical Releaseathon in Animal Studies, which was Study of Familiars, which is to read a book with an animal companion or familiar, and in that case, it was this bone dog, as well as a demon chicken. So this book follows Mara, who is the 3rd born princess of a small kingdom, and her 2 older sisters in succession married this prince, of a neighboring kingdom. Her eldest sister dies under mysterious circumstances, and then her middle sister gets married, and as part of the arrangement, Mara gets sent to a convent because her new brother-in-law is afraid of someone with a claim to her kingdom. And while she's there, she discovers that the prince is abusing her sister, and she's worried that her second sister might die. And so when her sister is pregnant for the multiple times, she finally goes out to seek a dust witch to try and find a way to kill the prince and save her sister. And along the way, the dust witch, a mercenary, a bone dog, and her fairy godmother join her in this quest. So this was a rec from Angela at Literature Science Alliance. This was a book that she loved, and I did enjoy this book. I thought it was the writing was really beautiful. I really liked the world building. I thought that there was a lot in here that was very interesting. Mara's she's a very different character than what you would normally find in these types of epic fantasies. She's much more unsure of herself. She's been very sheltered, and that very much influences her perspective on things and how she reacts to things. And then you also have the Dust Witch, who is someone we actually don't learn a whole lot about. She never becomes named. She's just kind of this magical enigmatic figure. And I apologize if you can hear my cat scratching at things in the background. He's choosing a very inconvenient time for this. So I enjoyed kind of the world building, the setting. I thought the characters were really interesting. One thing that I would have liked more of, it's a really short book, and there were times where I did want a little bit more, I don't know, depth in some of the characters. There were times where Mara felt a little underbaked for my preferences. So this is one, yeah, where I did want a little bit more from the plot and the characters. And I'll also say that we start this book like at the midpoint. We get a little bit of a flashback in terms of like the record scratch. You're probably wondering how I got here. That's very much the start of this book. But for the most part, I did enjoy it. I would give it a 4.5 or 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely plan on reading some more of T. Kingfisher's fantasy work. I know she also does horror, but I'm a wimp and I don't really read horror. But I know she has more of like fantasy romance books, which I think is going to be more my speed, especially because I did like the romance that was present in this book. The next book I read was much longer than the first, and that was The Final Strife by Sara El Arifi. This was for the new Releaseathon prompts debut, as well as new to me author, and for the Magical Readathon, it was for Owen Restoration, and that was Object Restoration, which is a singular focus on the cover. So this book follows 3 young women. They're in a world where your caste is essentially determined by your blood. Folks with red blood are the highest caste. They're the rulers of this empire. They're the ones who have access to magic. You have the blue bloods, which are the lower class. And they're the workers. They're the ones who are like the day-to-day, the people whose labor runs the empire. And then there's the ghostlings, those with clear blood. And those are essentially like the underclass. Due to a past rebellion, they lose at birth, they get their tongues and hands cut off. So that's set in this world. You have Scylla, who was born a red blood, but was kidnapped and raised among a revolutionary group with the intent of essentially finding a way for them to get power and overthrow the existing power structure and put the blue bloods in charge. You have Honor, who was one of the infants who was replacing one of the taken red blood children, and she has been raised by the Warden of Strength, so one of the 4 rulers in this kingdom. And then you have Hassa, who is a young trans ghostling, and she is working to serve. She's because she's essentially invisible by those above her, can see and work to further the ghostling's aims, which become more apparent as the book goes on. So the events of this book really kick off in the every 10 years tournament to replace the wardens and become their second in command. And Honor decides that she is going to try and prove herself to the woman who raised her and compete. And Scylla, who had kind of broken in to try and see what she was missing, is going to train her. So a lot, and that's just like scratching the surface with this book. So a lot happens with this book. Like, it is like 600 pages. She's very chunky. For the most part, I really enjoyed this book. I thought the world building was really interesting. It's a queer normative world where there are systems of oppression, but they aren't necessarily due to gender or sexual orientation, but it is very much about the color of your blood, and that influences pretty much everything about your status in this empire. I thought the world building was very interesting. So this is based off of Arabic and West African folklore and stories, and you can definitely, and there it's set in this world where there's like blue sand and nightly windstorms with the sand. You have the rulers, you have this kind of criminal underworld. I also thought the characters were very interesting as well. Honor starts off as like very much this spoiled rich girl, but you start peeling back the layers and finding more about what she's had to endure throughout her life with her mother. So spoiler alert for child abuse with this one. And you find out like her demeanor is very much this deliberate choice that she makes. Scylla is also a very interesting character because when we meet her, she's drug addicted. She's very much mourning the path that she thought she was going to take, and her arc throughout the story is kind of figuring out what does she want versus what she was raised to think that she wants. And I thought that was a very interesting story. And then Hassa, I think she doesn't get as much page time as Anora and Scylla, but I think she's honestly the one I'm most interested in because there's certain reveals in the plot that happen with the world and like what is actually going on and what the characters know versus what's the truth of the world that they live in. And Hassa is very much I wouldn't say instigator, but she's the spark for some of these revelations that I'm very interested in. I will say the thing that kind of detracted from my enjoyment in this was the pacing. There were times, especially in like the first third, where it dragged a little and I was like, do I really want to read this? Is this going to be something that I will enjoy? I'm not quite sure how I feel about these main characters, but once I hit, I would say like the 1/3 mark, it started picking up for me. So, but this is a debut novel, so I'm being a little bit more lenient than I might be with others about how this pacing is, especially for something so big. But overall, I thought this was really fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I liked all 3 main characters. I'm super interested as to what's going to happen in book 2, which the title is just announced. I think it's The Battle Drum. It's coming out next year, and I definitely plan on pre-ordering it because I thought that the world and the characters are really interesting. And I really want to know what's going to happen next with these 3 women. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend it if you're looking for a chunky epic fantasy book that isn't based on European history / mythology. Following that, the 3rd book that I read in August was An Unreliable Magic by Rinchi, narrated by Cassie Simone. This is the 2nd book in her 1,000 Names for Magic series, and it picks up where book 1 left off, where Tala and her best friend Alexander and their friends are on the island of Avalon, and Alexander is now the king and is dealing with everything that comes with that, of setting up a new government and trying to integrate refugees from Avalon into the country and dealing with foreign affairs. And Tala is dealing with some revelations that happen at the end of book 1, and stuff is also happening with her friends. This was very middle of the road for me. I had picked this up for the new Releaseathon prompt non-US author because Rinchi lives in the Philippines, as well as the magical Readathon prompt for shapeshifting, which was formation wings, so wings on the cover. There are wings on the audiobook cover. Anyway, this was a book where I honestly feel like this book probably could have been a duology. It didn't feel like a lot happened in this book. So I will say one of the things that really detracted from my enjoyment was I straight up forgot about the side characters because I read the first book back in 2020 and it's been 2 years and I straight up did not remember the group of Tala and Alexander's friends. I'm like, wait, who? Ken, Loki, I don't know, there was actually Nina. But like all these kids, and I'm like, I do not remember any of you. I do not remember like what was going on with your stories, like what your deal is. So that was part of it. And there's like no kind of refresher, which I wish there had been, like a 1-page, like, this is what happened last book, because like I said, I completely forgot like a decent chunk of the cast of characters. So I honestly don't have a whole lot to say about this. This was a middle book in a trilogy. Depending on what happens in book 3, I might change my opinion about this book. Didn't necessarily need to happen, but as of now, I think it didn't need to happen. I still don't really remember most of the characters. it very much felt like a lot of filler. And I think that's kind of where I'm gonna leave it. Like it wasn't bad. Like I don't think it was necessarily like poorly written, but I'm leaning towards like a 2.75 out of 5 for this one. Like it was fine. I might pick up the third book from the library when it comes out. I might not. I'm not really feeling the urge to find out how the story ends. It might just be a read it for completionist's sake type of thing. But yeah, that's really all I can say about this book. I don't, like, it's been over a month. I don't really remember anything anymore. After that, I read The Hookup Plan by Farrah Rochon. This is the third book in her Boyfriend Project series. This is a contemporary romance series that follows 3 women who find out that the guy they've individually been seeing has been 3-timing on them, and they confront him. The thing becomes viral, they become friends, and they decide to do a pact to kind of achieve some goals that they have and like not necessarily look for love. So this is the third book, and it follows London Kelly. She's a pediatric surgeon who is dealing with a lot of stress in her job. One of her goals is to try and find a hobby, try and reduce stress. And when we meet her in this book, she's getting ready for her high school reunion, which she organized. And in the crowd is her high school nemesis, Drew Sullivan. They hook up and they're like, well, it won't be any like a no strings thing. And except it turns out that Drew and his company have been hired by London's hospital to audit the hospital and decide whether or not it's going to be sold. And things go from there. It's a romance. They get their happily ever after. This was fun. Like I read it in a day. It's exactly I think it was a really good palate cleanser after an Unreliable Magic. I just, in general, the series, I really like the characters. I really like the romances. I particularly appreciated in this book that the bleak moment in the third act wasn't a breakup due to miscommunication, but was instead like an external bleak moment for the characters. So they still were in a relationship, they still were committed, but there was like outside circumstances that were causing the bleakness, which if you watch my videos, you know that the third act breakup is my least favorite romance trope. And so I was very happy to see that this book didn't do that. This is a really great series. I really like Farrah Rochon's writing for her adult romances, and depending on what she does next, I'll probably pick up, if she does another romance series, I'll pick it up just because I really enjoyed these 3 books. I love the characters and romances. I think this was like a 3.75 out of 4 stars for me. I definitely would recommend this. It's just, they're a lot of fun. Following that, I read a book for neither Readathon, however, it was kind of for a book club. So this was Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is the first book in her Books of Amba duology. And this was for Marines over at My Name is Marines does a monthly book pick in conjunction with an audiobook company. And so this was August pick. And I'd had this book for a while and I'd been meaning to read it. So I figured this was a good time to do that. And I'm really glad I did. I really liked this. So this book follows Meher. She is the daughter of a governor of a province, as well as an Amrithi mother, a minority group that's being persecuted by the Empire for the magical powers. And during a dream storm, she exhibits those powers, and then the Empire's mystics come to bind her in marriage to another Amrithi man in order to serve the Empire. And this book is kind of her relationship with him developing, and oh my god, I cannot remember, I feel so bad, I cannot remember his name. Her relationship with Amun, as well as her unraveling, like, what does the Empire, particularly the head mystic, want with the Amrithi, and how is that tied to her mother's disappearance and what's happening with her people. So I really liked this book. I really liked Meher, and the depiction of like a not, like, I would classify her as a capable lady. I really don't like the term strong female character because I feel like it defaults to a certain type of woman or a girl character. So I prefer capable lady because I think there are so many different varieties of capable ladies. And I think Meher definitely is that. She's someone who, well, she's been sheltered, starts to figure out what's going on and starts trying to find ways to resist and liberate herself, Amun, as well as her people. And then there's also kind of the responsibility we have towards others. That's another theme, and bringing balance to the world and not corrupting that balance for the sake of your own wants. Yeah, this was just, I really liked this. This was very good. I thought the writing was really beautiful. I thought the world building was very interesting. I really liked the main characters. I know book 2 is centered on Meher's younger sister, who we briefly meet in the first part. So I do own it. I do plan on reading it at some point, as well as her sequel series, or her second series. I think The Burning Kingdoms is the title. It's the one that starts with the Jasmine Throne. Anyway, I really like this. I'm very glad I picked it up. I would say, I think I gave this 4.25 out of 5. Yeah, definitely one I'm planning on keeping on my shelves for the foreseeable future. Following that, moving back into the 2 readathons, I read The Bruising of Kilwa by Nasim Jamnia. This is a Persian-inspired fantasy novella, and it fit the prompts for LGBTQ+ and novella for the new Releaseathon, as well as the O in astronomy for the magical readathon, which is Lilive, so read a book with an L in the title. So this novella follows a NB blood mage / healer, Firuz, who with their family has fled to the city of Kilwa, and Firuz is trying to find employment to support their family, and they get hired by the last free clinic in Kilwa, and they also find another young refugee who has the similar magic. And this book is divided into like 3 years. So the first is Firuz getting settled, dealing with a plague at their new job. And then book 2 is kind of unraveling this new ailment, as well as dealing with some tension in their family because their younger sibling wants to transition and they don't have the money to pay for people, and Firuz is trying to figure out spells for that. And the city politics of keeping this last free clinic open. So yeah, this I thought was a very good debut. I did have some issues with the pacing. There's so many ideas in this novella, and it's not super long. It's like 170 pages, and there's just so many ideas that I kind of wish the author had put like 1 or 2 of them back and really focused on some key ones. I'm not sure which though, which is kind of the problem because they're all very intertwined. But I definitely thought that the discussions about the city politics and the refugees was very interesting. While I was reading it, particularly the first part, I'm like, this very much reads like the city setup. Like, the author has played Dragon Age 2, and I was right. The author has played Dragon Age, and I could definitely feel the influences of Kirkwall on the city. So I don't know if that would make people more interested or not, but if you really enjoyed, especially like Act 1 of DA2, read this. But yeah, and I also thought that the antagonists, when they're finally revealed, their motivations were a little murky for me. So, and I think that was kind of part of, this is a novella that's very full of a lot of very interesting ideas, at times to its detriment. But I thought overall I did like it. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5. I definitely am interested in what this author does next. And if you're looking for a novella that's not Tor.com, I would recommend picking this up. Next, I read The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This was for the genre bender prompt for the new Releaseathon, as well as the O for elemental studies, which was element of water, and that was to start a book with a drink. And so I started this while I was drinking my morning coffee one day. So this is a retelling / reinterpretation of the Island of Dr. Moreau. And you have two main points of view characters. You have Carlotta, who is the daughter of Dr. Moreau, and you have Montgomery Lawton, who is hired as the major domo of the estate. And there are two parts to the story. One is when Montgomery starts his job, and then the second is like 4 or 5 years later, where the son of Dr. Moreau's patron arrives at the estate and falls in love at first sight with Carlotta, and things devolve from there. So I really like Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing. She's one of my favorite authors. And this was one where I did enjoy it. However, I did have some issues with the pacing. I thought that the first half was pretty slow, and then it picks up like a breakneck speed towards the end. So I would have liked a little bit more evenness with that pacing. However, I did really enjoy the world building. She set it in the real life Costa War in, I think, the 1870s, where the Maya in the Yucatan Peninsula were revolting against the Mexican government, particularly the white hacienderos, who were essentially enslaving them and forcing them to work on their haciendas. So this is taking place in that backdrop, and influences the behavior and choices of several of the characters. I really thought Carlotta was a very interesting point of view character. She's very much in the vein of Victorian, like, you can definitely tell the influences of like later 19th century literature on this book. But yeah, this is one where I definitely would have liked it to be a little bit longer. It's under 300 pages. It's really short. But I thought that the discussion Silvia Moreno Garcia was having on race and scientific ethics and just the politics of the time were very interesting. She leaves it off in a very kind of, I would say it's a happy ending for Carlotta, but I could see others kind of not liking the ending. It worked for me. But yeah, this was definitely one thing I like about Silvia Moreno Garcia is like every book that you get from her is very different, and this is no exception. So I would say if you're looking for a different flavor of science fiction, one where there's definitely a historical aspect to it, where it's not like, it's much more meditative. I think that's the word I would use for this. I would recommend this. I haven't read the original Island of Dr. Moreau, so I can't really talk about how it works in conversation in that, but I would say that overall I liked this book. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5. And I'm very excited to see where Silvia Moreno Garcia goes with her next book. After that, I read The House of Shattered Wings by Aliette de Bollard. This was for the Magical Readathon prompt Q in Restoration, which was Enchanted Spell Mending, which was read the oldest book on your TBR. I'm not quite sure if this is the oldest book on my TBR. However, it was on my Reader on Haul video, which I made earlier this year, and it's one I've owned for a while. So this takes place in an alternate late 20th century Earth, where fallen angels exist, magical creatures exist, and there was this great war between fallen angels. And we are now in a ruined Paris, and we're following 3 main characters. The first is Philippe, who is, in our world, he is from Vietnam. He was conscripted to fight in this war, and he has magical powers of his own, which are very different than the fallen angel magic. There's Madeline, who is a human alchemist in House Silver Spires, who's addicted to angel essence and is dealing with trauma from her past. And then there's Celine, who's the head of House Silver Spires, who is trying to hold her house together after the founder, Lucifer Morningstar, vanishes. And the plot kicks off where a young fallen angel arrives and Philippe discovers her, and Celine takes them both in. And there's a curse on the house and they have to find out who is targeting them. So this is a book where I thought parts of it worked for me very well. I liked the discussion of politics. I thought that this envisioning of a world where fallen angels exist, where other magical creatures exist, was really interesting. One of my critiques sometimes with historical fantasy / modern fantasy is there are times where I'm like, well, what was the point of having this magic if things read very similarly? And I didn't talk about it with Unreliable Magic, but that's one of my problems with that series, is that the world is very much like ours. Like, there's some differences, but it's really similar to ours in a way that doesn't quite hold up for me. But I thought this one, the world building made sense to me. I thought that the world building around fallen angels was also very interesting. And I did like Philippe and Madeline. However, I did not particularly like Celine. And this is one of my big critiques. I know Rachel over at Culinati has similar thoughts because we've talked about it, is there are times Celine holds the idiot ball a little too tightly, and it's like, girl, you are the head of this house. Why are you acting so dumb? Except for the fact that the plot needs you to act like this. So that was really frustrating. Celine's character just didn't make a lot of sense to me, which is, again, frustrating because she's one of the main 3 points of view characters, and we're in her head a lot, and she's just making these mistakes, and it's like, it doesn't make sense with what we've been told about your character. So that was particularly frustrating. I am interested in what's going to be happening in the sequel, given where this left off. However, I do think I'm going to unhaul this book. It's not one where I necessarily feel the urge to reread it. My library has copies. And honestly, if I did keep a hold of this, I'd probably just buy the UK version since they all match. And like the US one, the publisher dropped the series after book 2. Anyway, this was a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was an interesting start. I'm hoping that the characters in book 2 don't frustrate me quite as much as they did in book 1. Next, with another kind of frustrating character book, was Fire Becomes Her by Rosie Thor. This was for the new Releaseathon prompt, book with no articles in the title, as well as book you hadn't heard about. I mostly found out about this because the author is local to me and was signing books at my local indie. And for the Magical Readathon prompt, this was for Q and Elemental Studies, which was win redirection. So basically point to a book, choose a book on either side. So that's how I got this one. This is set in a secondary world that's similar to the 1920s in terms of aesthetic. And they have this magic called flame, and it's concentrated at the top. There's kind of an imitation, but it doesn't really taste right, that called flare. And the main character, Irene, is a poor woman who is in this high class school and is trying to secure her spot in higher society so she's not poor again. And to do that, she's attached herself to Lyndon Holt, who is the son of a senator who doesn't approve of the relationship. And so in order to, impress him, she goes undercover at the rival campaign for the presidency. And in doing so, she has to confront what she's been doing, and does she really want the role that she's trying to get in the society. So, like I said, Irene is a frustrating character in this book. What I did like, I will say, if you're looking for good aromantic, asexual representation, it is this book. Irene is definitely on the aromantic spectrum. There's another aromantic character, Alex, who is who's non-binary, and I really liked their character. You have her friend, who is also on the spectrum. I thought that the idea of flame and flare was very interesting. I'm pretty sure. Okay, so it's flare and flicker. That's it. So it's flare and flicker. So I thought that was interesting. However, Irene was she was frustrating because there were times where it was like she was so close to having this revelation that you knew the book was building towards, but she was just holding so firmly to her worldview and like what she had been trying to achieve, where it just, like I said, it was frustrating. The world building was interesting. The pacing was fine. But yeah, this one, I would say like a 3.25 out of 5. I don't really have much more to say other than it was kind of frustrating. The second to last book that I read in August was not frustrating. It was almost my favorite book, except it was beat out by the last book, and that was In the Serpents Wake by Rachel Hartman. This was for the new Releaseathon prompt sequel, as well as the D in Elemental Studies, which was Wave Redirection, which was Read a Book with a Sea Voyage, which this has. So this is the sequel to Tess of the Road, which is one of my favorite YA books. And this book picks up pretty much immediately after. We are following Tess, who, as part of her promise to her, oh my God, I can never remember the pronunciation, who's trying to save her friend by bringing them to the Arctic World Serpent. Marga, who is the head of the expedition, she's a noblewoman who wants to discover this world serpent for scientific purposes. Spira, who is a disabled dragon who is also trying to get to the world serpent for their own reasons and does not particularly like Tess. And then Giacomo, who is a runaway priest in training who had been following Tess throughout Tess of the Road and joins her for this part of the journey. And so they're sailing to, let me see if they're sailing to the bottom of the world. I can't remember. And along the way, they're confronting colonialism, racism. How do you revolt and resist? How do you be a good ally? Yeah, this, oh my God, this was so good. So this doesn't quite live up to Tess of the Road for me, just because that, for me, in my opinion, was a perfect book. But this is also just quite good. I thought, so what Hartman is doing in this book is telling a different type of story, where Tess was a very internally focused story. It was her healing from some of the trauma in her past, dealing with her family, some experiences that she had had, which I won't go into because they're spoilers. It was very much an internally focused book. This book is more externally focused. It's very much, what are our responsibilities towards others? Like I said, how do you be a good ally? One of the key plots in this book is the indigenous population of this archipelago, who have been oppressed by one of the European-inspired countries in this world, Ninnis. How can someone like Tess be a good ally? And she goes through several stumbling blocks. And one thing I appreciate with this book, and with Tess and Giacomo, is they're not the ones who save them. Like, they have a role. However, there have been plans in place before they appeared, that they play a small part in, but they're not the focus of. So I thought that was very well done on Hartman's part. I also really liked the fact that one of the themes of this book was, if Tess of the Road was about healing yourself, this book was more of how do you heal others you've wronged, and sometimes the answer is you can't. So Tess has a history with Spira, and because Tess had stolen Spira's medicine back when she was younger, and it very much hurt Spira, and Spira doesn't forgive Tess, and the text doesn't shame Spira for that. It's very much upheld as, you know what? it's perfectly fine if you don't forgive someone who hurt you. It's fine if you understand what they were going through, but you are not obligated to forgive this person. And I thought that was really well done as well. I really liked the characters. Marga got a little frustrating at times. But for the most part, I thought this was a very, very good book that delves into kind of the age of discovery and the problems that were inherent in that. And can you really discover something that Indigenous people already know? And how do you be a good ally? And how do you support people who are resisting oppression? And how do you keep it so that one oppression isn't traded for another? And yeah, this was so good. I don't know if there's going to be a third book in this series. I really hope there is. There's definitely a sequel hook for that, and I'm very interested if what I think the sequel hook is what ends up being developed if there is a third book. But this was so good. I gave this a 4.75. Well, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I might be changing mine to a 5-star just because this was really good. I definitely plan on nominating it for the Lodestar. If you love Tess of the Road, please read this. Just know it's a different story, but it's very much Tess at the heart. Tess encountering the world and learning from it and challenging her perceptions. And oh my God, so good. Highly recommend it. And then the last book I read in August was my favorite book in August, and that was Be the Serpent by Shauna McGuire. This is the 16th book in the October Days series. And if book 15 was a breather episode, this is not. This is a wham episode. This is shit is getting real. Shit is changing. I was right about certain aspects of what was going to happen in this book. I was very wrong. I did not expect others. I cannot get into detail because it is so spoilery for the series. Like, this is book 16. All I can say is that Shauna McGuire is very good at long-term plotting. There's a lot of seeds that have been planted throughout the series that come to fruition. There's things that in this book, I know once we get into future installments, I'm going to look back and be like, oh my God, she was planting the seeds for whatever's happening next in this book. There was some heartbreaking moments in this book. Content warning for death of child in like the first third of the book. It is very rough to read, so just be aware of that. But I love this series. It's so good. And I'm really upset I have to wait a year to find out the resolution to the cliffhanger the book ends on. God, I desperately need book 17 in my life now because I gotta know what the fuck is happening. So that was my August. So like I said, I had a very good month in August, but I cannot say that I had a good September reading. I only read 2 books. The first of which is Babble by R.F. Kuang. This is the Fairy Loot edition, which has really cool sprayed edges. It has really cool end papers. It's a very pretty edition. So this is a historical fantasy set in 1930s Oxford, and it follows a young man, Robin Swift, who was born in Canton, and after his family dies in a cholera outbreak, is rescued by an English professor and brought to England, where he takes the name Robin Swift, and he is being trained to study at Babble, which is the Royal Institute of Translation. And when he gets there, he meets the rest of his cohort, Rami, who is a young Muslim man from India, Victoire, who is originally from Haiti, and Letty, who is the daughter of a British admiral. And this book centers on the magic of translation, like literal magic of translation, but it also goes into the racism of the time, the idea of progress, or like what's considered progress versus how it affects people. How do we resist? This was very good, and I think part of the reason I only read 2 books in this month, or in September, was that this one was so good but also so heavy. It took me a while to get through. This is the first book by R.F. Kuang that I've read. I didn't read The Poppy War. so I didn't really have any experience with her writing, but this was very well written. This is, as someone who works in academia, I appreciated that one of the central components of this is reckoning with the rot at the core of academia in terms of how did these institutions get started? What are their legacies? So while this one takes place at Oxford and goes into how an institution like Oxford University gets its funds, how it sustains itself on the backs of marginalized people, how empire sustains itself on exploiting marginalized people, you also have to look, like I work at a land-grant university. Land grant started because settler colonists stole land from the indigenous populations and put them on reservations and were systematically killing them off. And so that's part of the reckoning that land-grant universities are going through right now, is trying to deal with our genocidal past while also trying to re-examine our mandate to serve the state. So I like I said, as someone who works in academia, I very much appreciated that component of this book. I also think that, and I think she very much foreshadows the ending of this book, so it didn't catch me by surprise. I also, I'm trying to think of smart things to say about this book, because this is a very smart book. But I think at its whole, what stood out for me was this is both a love and a breakup letter to academia. This is people trying to grapple with their places in a racist institution, and how can things be better. It also gets into the politics of empire and resistance, and how do you resist an empire? How do you break it down? How do you stop it? So that was really good. I think one thing I also appreciated was the footnotes in this book. So let me see if I can, So there are some footnotes, and I have like theories about who's writing the footnotes, but it's never explained. They're just there. But yeah, I really loved this book. It's just, it's beautiful and brutal and uncompromising. It's very much worth the hype. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I definitely think this is one of the best books I've read this year. And I'm very interested to see what she's doing. I know she's doing more of like a lit fic book for her next one. But I'm kind of interested in going back and reading The Poppy War, just to kind of see how it developed into this masterpiece. And then the last book I'm going to talk about in this video is another dark academia book. However, it's doing dark academia differently than Babble, and I will get into that. And that is The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. This is the Fairy Loot edition. I love some straight edges, more character artwork. So this follows 6 magicians who have been selected to be inducted into the Alexandrian Society because they're very powerful magicians, or Medeans, and but at the end of the first year of this like 2-year fellowship, only 5 of them will be inducted, and they're just said that 1 will be eliminated. And you get to know the 6. There's Libby and Nico, who have just graduated college and are rivals, but they're very much bound together. There's Tristan, who can see through illusions, but that's not all he can do. There's Parisa, who's telepathic. Callum, who's has empathy, who's also kind of a sociopath. And then there's Raina, who is kind of a naturalist, but it's complicated. And so, yeah. So this one, like I said, it's doing dark academia, but at least for like the first 2/3 of it, it's very much like dark academia vibes and not what I want from dark academia, which Babble does, which is kind of poking at the institution of academia, including at like the rottenness in it, and kind of reckoning with that. And you get some of that towards the end with this, but it felt a little late. There are times where it felt like Olivia Blake's ambitions got away from her in terms of like the word choices and stuff. Like, this book is very readable, however. Like, I never felt like this book dragged, which is to its credit. But there were times where when I was reading it, I'm just like, you're using these 10-cent words just to use these 10-cent words, aren't you? I thought the more we got into the characters, I liked the depth, some of the depth we got with the characters eventually. I'm hoping we get more in book 2, which I do plan on pre-ordering just because where this left off, I'm interested to see what's happening in the Atlas Paradox. But yeah, there definitely was times where it felt like Olivia Blake was trying to be smarter than she was with this. Or like, she was trying to make the text smarter than it necessarily was. So yeah, I also think that how I was picturing this with Dark Academia definitely suffered because I literally read this right after Babble, and Babble was just so good and was doing what I wanted with Dark Academia, and this wasn't necessarily. But yeah, like I did enjoy the characters. I thought the world building was a little vibe space, but also interesting. I'm intrigued by some of the revelations that happened in the last quarter, where I want to find out what is going on in this world with book 2. So I gave this, I would say, like a 3.75 or 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely enjoyable. Definitely want to see what is going on with this group of characters moving forward. So that's my combined 2 months in reading, one really good, one super low. So I'm planning on keeping my October low-key, not putting stress on myself, and just kind of mood reading to my heart's content and seeing if I can recover from a very low September reading month. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on the books that I've read? Did you also love Babble as much as I did? Please let me know in the comments below. Yeah. Anyway, that's it from me. If you enjoy what you see, please like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk with you later. Bye.